This morning's reading is from Rays of the One Light, written by Swami Kriyananda with commentaries from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, written by Yogananda. And this morning is first things first. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. That expression, first things first, is a piece of counsel often given to students of business techniques. It is the advice of practicality to those who aspire to worldly success. But according to the Hermetic doctrine, as above, so below, that which works best in one level of life is often the best guide to what will work best on every other level. If a person is true to his highest potentials or priorities, he will generally find that his other needs are fulfilled naturally as well. That is true certainly of the search for God. One of the greatest sayings of Jesus Christ was this simple sentence to the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 6. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Paramhansa Yogananda gave his elder brother Ananda a wonderful lesson in this truth. It was Ananda who had captured him and brought him back from the flight to the Himalayas, described by Yogananda in Autobiography of a Yogi. In Yogananda's book, we read how Ananda later challenged him in the city of Agra to pit his divine faith against such practical, worldly considerations as a need for earning a living. Fearless before that challenge, the young aspirant agreed to go by train without any money to the nearby town of Vrindavan, not to miss a single meal in Vrindavan, and to find his way back to Agra without begging and without in any other way asking for help. And in one of the most thrilling chapters in the book, Yogananda fulfilled all the conditions of the test. Yogananda continued the account. As the tale was unfolded, my brother turned sober, then solemn. The law of demand and supply reaches into subtler realms than I had supposed. Ananda spoke with a spiritual enthusiasm never before noticeable. I understand for the first time your indifference to the volts and the vulgar accumulations of the world. Late as it was, my brother insisted that he receive Diksha, initiation into Kriya Yoga. As the Bhagavad Gita puts it in the 9th chapter, those who worship lesser gods go to their gods, but those who worship me come to me. And thus through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. When I was a little girl, about 6 years old, I remember coming downstairs, and I'm going to date myself here. I had a Shirley Temple doll. And my sister, who was a couple years older than me, also had a Shirley Temple doll. So we came downstairs, it was Christmas morning, and there were, under the tree, a blue suitcase, a doll suitcase, with the Shirley Temple doll sitting on top of it, with a blue and white dress, and then there was a pink suitcase, which was mine, and it had the Shirley Temple doll on it with a pink and white dress. And then inside the two suitcases were doll clothes that my mother had made. Now, if you know anything about sewing, the intricacy of sewing doll clothes is pretty impressive. But more than that was the amount of love that she shared. Now, of course, I thought it was Santa Claus who did it. But I did learn later on, I got it, it was her who actually was the one. And the love that came across from that act of kindness, that act of love for her children, has just, and it's stuck with me, obviously, for so many years. It's just been imprinted in my mind. And when Master, we talk about the story of the two penniless boys. Master, actually, before that, Master would lament about his mother's passing, and he was grieving so much. And one day, Divine Mother came to him, and she said, "Don't you know it was me who was behind that, who was behind those dark eyes? It was me the whole time." And when Master talked about this story about the two penniless boys in Vrindavan, his brother Ananda said to him, "Yogananda, money first, then God. You don't know. You could live for a very long time." And Yogananda responded, No. He said, "God first. Money is his slave, because you don't know. You could live for a very short time." And Ananta said to him, "Well, so you mean to tell me you're not dependent on God's money, or on our Father's money?" And Yogananda said, "I am," I'm going to quote it exactly. He said, "I am conscious of my dependence on God," which really, the subtlety of that statement bears thinking about, because he didn't say, "I'm dependent on God." He said, "I'm conscious of my dependency on God." In other words, God is behind everything. And that's the point he was trying to make. I'm not going to be concerned, is what he said. I'm not going to be concerned with some passerby who gives to me, the conditions that he was told he had to give, where he had to follow, which were he was not allowed to beg. He had no money on him. These two boys, Jitendra, his friend, went with him. These two boys had dhotis on. They didn't have pockets. There's no money. They were naked from the waist up. And that was all that they had with them when they went to Vrindavan. And he said, "I'm not going to be dependent on some passerby." He said, the devotee of God will give them, God has 1,000 different ways that he could answer my needs. I don't have to beg for it. And so, when we think, well, let me take you back a minute. There's a story, it's called A Man Named John. At least, I don't know, maybe I called it The Story of John. I don't know. It's one of Master's stories. So I call him John. So there's this man named John. And he is, he's of good physical health, very good physical health. He's financially well off. And his wife is a bit of a shrew. And she nags at him all the time. So at the end of his life, he says, God and Divine Mother steps in and says, yes, John, what can I do for you? Next life, when I come back, I want good health. I want to be a good yogi. I want a lot of money, and I want a beautiful wife. I want a wife that anyone would just be excited to have. I need her to be sweet and gorgeous and lovely and kind and all these things. So Divine Mother said, fine. John came back the next life. Good body, lots of money, and his wife was amazing. She was so kind. He had many, many years of wonderful companionship. But what happened? She got old. So he would have to shout to her into the next room. He'd have to help her with the menial tasks of life. He started to resent it. And he got to the point where he just said, God, next life. Yes, John, what is it? And he started listing it again. Okay, I want a good body, check. I want lots of money, check. I want to be a good yogi, gotcha. He said it, I want a younger wife. I'll be a few years older than her. She can be a little more vivacious, beautiful. So what happens? So John comes back. Good body, yogi, all of these things are answered. And he ends up with this beautiful young wife. She was his secretary. John comes out one day. She's standing there talking to a younger man. Next thing you know, she's off. She's taken all his money with her. He no longer has his wife. And his livelihood, his whole life is wiped out completely. And God, he called on God. God came in. Yes, John, what's up? He said, new Lamborghini? There's the 2023s are out right now. Is that what you're in? He said, you want a house on the hill? What is it, John? What would you like? And John says, no. All I want is you now. So when we put God first, like Master did, he put him first in that story about the two penniless boys in Vrindavan. Master had put God first his whole life. Master was, all of his prayers had been answered on that one trip. That his brother had listed all the criteria, and Master had met every single bit of it. So how do we put God first? Well, obviously through our morning meditations. We try to wake up first thing, hopefully, is to think about God. Last thing before we go to bed, to try to think about God. If you need to, you can put pictures around your room so that when you wake up, that's the first thing you see. Is perhaps Master or one of the saints. So that's the first thing you think about. We go through life and we not only have to put God first on that level, but even in the most mundane parts of our life, we should be asking God, is this what you want? Is this what you want me to say? Is this how you want me to behave? Is this what you want me to do? And we can look at our lives and we can think, we put these desires ahead of God and we don't even realize it. And next thing you know, you're fulfilling some desire and where did this come from? But if you stopped and looked at it and really looked at it, you would see the depth that God is operating in your life. And sometimes these desires they're just subconscious. What did Master say? I am conscious of my relationship with God. But here we are subconsciously, we don't even realize it. We are subconsciously putting out desire after desire after desire after desire. And we don't even realize it. And next thing you know, we're kind of off track. There's a story of Vidura. Many of you probably know Vidura. For many years, he was in charge of the village at Ananda village. And he said, they used to do pilgrimages to India. And he said, one morning I got up and I had to get all this stuff taken care of. So I was supposed to meet some guy and I ended up missing the appointment. I was supposed to take a train. I missed the train, yada, yada, yada. It went on and on and on. The day was a catastrophe. He said the next day, and that morning I had woken up and I hadn't meditated. But the next morning I woke up. And the first thing I did was make my connection to the divine. And he said everything went smoothly from that point on. And sometimes the things that come to us that we ask for, they're disguised. We think we're asking, we see something and there's a lot of glitter around it. And there's a lot of pizzazz, like John with his last wife. But sometimes these things come to us and it's very subtle, and we reject them. We don't even know that God is responding to us. When Master went and took the train to Vrindavan, he and Jitendra was sitting on the train, and these two men were sitting next to them. They were in the same car with them. And Yogananda was sitting there, and one of the men turned to him and he said, so it looks like you may have taken off from your family and are on some kind of a trip, maybe on your way to Vrindavan for some kind of an experience. And Yogananda looked at him and very rudely said, it's none of your business what we're doing. And the man said, well, I too am a devoted pilgrimage, or a devoted pilgrim, and so I would love to, help you out, help you find something to eat maybe, get you out of this heat. Yogananda said, well, that's really kind of you, but no thanks, no thanks. Well, they got off the train, they landed in Vrindavan, and the two men came up and they locked arms with Jitendra and Yogananda, and they walked him to a woman's house. And the woman opened the door, she was very kind, and the man said, we couldn't bring the princes, so is it okay if these two young gentlemen have the meal that you've prepared? It was a meal for royalty. And they were brought in, they spent the afternoon there, they stayed out of this god-awful heat, and they had a feast. And that was the way that Divine Mother answered the prayer. But the first thing he was going to do was, no, that's not for me, sorry. You're waiting for the bells and the whistles to be happening all the time. So, Divine Mother, our relationship to God is a friendship, a lover, a sister, a brother, whatever it is that you deem your relationship to be with God, it takes work. Any relationship takes work. It takes commitment, it takes loyalty, understanding, kindness, energy. It takes energy to have a relationship with God. And so that's the thought I'll leave you with, is putting God first. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you. As Master said, Divine Mother has 1,000 different ways of answering the devotee's prayer in ways that you can't even imagine. And if you can keep moving in that direction, what's there to worry about? What's there to be afraid of? If you're in attunement with God, she keeps you on the straight and narrow. You get off attunement with God, that's where the destruction comes in. That's where we get tripped up. Just stay focused on God. God first, God alone.
Thank you, Devaki. When I read this topic for this morning, what struck me right away is this is really about setting our priorities straight in life. And I've always been a very goal-directed person, perhaps because I'm a Capricorn. And I consider myself fortunate that I think I sort of intuitively got this, at least in a worldly sense, from a young age. And that has allowed me to be somewhat successful in the world with. And I want to share with you a story about that from my own life as an example, and then talk about sort of how do we take these principles and apply them to our spiritual lives. So the story I'm going to tell you is about my applying for medical school. And I remember very distinctly, and this had been a long-term dream of mine from young childhood, but I remember very distinctly at the beginning of my sophomore year of college, sitting in the library at the University of Washington. I had just transferred there from a smaller school, and now I was at this huge state school with hundreds of people in my classes who I didn't know, who were smart, many of whom were pre-med, and realizing, I have my work cut out for me. And realizing that I needed to put all of my focus and energy and concentration on doing what it was going to take for me to get into medical school. And so, of course, part of that involved putting all of my energy into my classes, which I did, but that's not sufficient. And not only did I want to go to medical school, but I wanted to get into one of these dual degree programs so I could do medical research. And that really required that I find a job in a research lab doing research with somebody more senior and getting my name on a couple of papers. And I looked around for opportunities, and the only paying jobs that I could find in research labs involved washing glassware. And that wasn't going to quite cut it. And so I kept looking, and I found a scholarship opportunity that would pay me to do research in a lab of my choice. And so I applied, and fortunately I got that, and I found a lab, and they were very happy to have some free labor, and did that. And when that scholarship ended, had proved myself enough that the head of the lab agreed to keep me on and continue to pay me. The other big hurdle for getting into medical school is something called the MCAT, the Medical College Admissions Test. It's a big standardized exam. And like for many of these exams, there are companies that will run these programs to help prepare you to take the exam. And I had not originally planned to do that. But by some stroke of luck, I managed to win a raffle coupon that was something like, 40% off of one of these courses. It was a big deal. So I took that as a sign that maybe I should sign up for one of these courses, and realized that actually it would be very helpful for giving me some structured time to focus on studying for this exam. And so for a period of months, every Saturday morning from 8 a.m. to noon, I was in a lecture hall listening to somebody talking on different topics that were potentially on this exam, and taking notes and doing test questions, and sipping cold water to try to stay awake. Because I was taking a full load of classes and working 15 to 20 hours a week in the lab. And there are 4 parts to this exam. There's a biological sciences section, and I was a biology major, so I figured I had that one covered, and I didn't put much energy into studying for that section. There was a physical sciences section, which was chemistry and physics, and I knew that was my weak area, and so that's where I devoted most of my time. And then there was a social sciences and a writing section. Well, I got, of all 4 sections, I got the highest score on the physical sciences section, and the lowest score on the biological sciences section. Which goes to show you where you put your energy and your awareness is where you reap your rewards, right? And I bought my suit, and I did some practice interviewing, and I got in. And I remember early on in those first few months of medical school, sitting in a large lecture hall with about 100 other students, being like, whoa, I'm actually here. Now what? Because I had spent years of my life looking forward to getting into medical school. And of course I knew there was residency and stuff beyond, but in that moment it was like, okay, what's my next big thing now? What's a goal that's worthy of setting? And fortunately, I had started meditating in college. I had started studying with some teachers and thinking about the spiritual path. And I realized that was really kind of where I wanted to be heading my life toward, concurrently with my medical training. And fortunately found Ananda in Seattle and became a disciple, and then started learning to play the harmonium. And we'll fast forward a few years here, now past my research training, and as a third-year medical student, every 6 weeks I was traveling to a different place in the Pacific Northwest to do a clinical rotation, pediatrics, obstetrics, psychiatry, family medicine, what have you. And invariably, I would be asked to play the harmonium for a special event that would happen to be the night before a big exam, the night before I'm leaving town, the night after I get back in town. It was almost like a little game Divine Mother was playing with me. And I'll admit, I mean, I had some trepidation about saying yes, especially, taking 2 hours off the night before a big exam. But I found something very, very interesting in that process that really helped to start grow my faith, which was that when I made time for Divine Mother, all this other stuff worked out. Now, that didn't mean I could just drop the ball and abandon my studying completely. I still had to study and prepare. But if I did that, and then went and played the harmonium, it all worked out. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you. So, how do we begin to put Divine Mother first in our lives? Devaki talked a little bit about this, and I'll add a few more thoughts to this. First, consciously setting the intention, telling our brains, this is what I want. And all the other things that I do in my life, I'm going to sort of reflect around this single pillar. And do they support it? Is it kind of indifferent, or is it pulling me away from that goal? Using habit for good, developing that daily meditation practice, prayer, habits of right thinking to help support you. Another big piece is just showing up. Yogananda said not to forget our daily tryst with God. It amazes me sometimes in the world that I'm in, professionally, how there have been times I've known people who really want to be part of a certain group within the medical center or want to move their career forward in a particular direction, and yet they never come to any of the meetings that group is holding. And then they're like, I really would like to do this, but I don't feel part of the group, and I know none of these things happen to me. I'm like, you're never present. You don't mix with these people. These opportunities don't come because you don't show up. We have to show up and be present. Where we place our time, our energy, our attention, our awareness, that determines the direction of our lives. There's a great quote from Lord of the Rings that I was reminded of in preparing for this talk. Gandalf, who's the guru figure, if you will, is talking to Frodo, every man disciple. And Frodo is bemoaning all of the trials and tribulations that he's been through, all of the suffering that he's witnessed. He's saying, I wish I'd never had this ring. And Gandalf is trying to give him some wise counsel about the fact that things come to us in our lives often that we don't ask for. All we have to do is decide what to do with the time that is given us, is what he says. And isn't that so true? As Devaki was saying, this conversation between Yogananda and his brother Ananta, right? We don't know how much time we have. We don't know what's going to come to us in our lives. But we can decide how we're going to spend the time that we have. And are we going to spend that time in a way that's going to help us grow spiritually, in a way that's going to do good in the world? Or are we going to spend that time just filling our own sort of selfish desires? Mindfulness is a topic that has become very popular, and I think it has a helpful place. It's a good stepping stone, but it's not enough. And what I'd like to suggest is that really what we have to do in our lives is transform mindful awareness of the present moment into mindful awareness of the presence of God in each moment. And that's practicing the presence of God. And We can't do that or practice mindful awareness 24/7 in the beginning. Like, our brains are just used to doing this and being scattered and all over the place. And so we start with the little moments and then gradually begin to expand that awareness into other aspects and larger periods of our lives. And as we do that, we develop that relationship with God, with Master. And with that, we begin to grow, as Sri Yukteswar said, the natural love of the heart. And that's really where this is all about, because our energy and our awareness follow our heart's feelings. You know, as the saying goes, God watches the heart. And so as we begin to cultivate that relationship, as we begin to ask God to come into our daily activities, it's not that we need to wall ourselves off from the world. Most of us, myself, included particularly, right? I have to live and work in the world. And so it's about, how do I bring and invite God into my life to transform my life and to transform me so that I can be the best version of myself. I'm just going to end with a quote from chapter 13 of the autobiography of a yogi, The Sleepless Saint. Yogananda goes to visit Ram Gopal Muzumdar, who was a very highly advanced disciple of Lahiri Mahashaya. And Ram Gopal is telling him, you can't know God by just a few years of meditation. This is a lifelong adventure. And he ends with this promise, which I think is a divine promise for each of us. Do not fix your spiritual ideal on a small mountain, but hitch it to the star of unqualified divine attainment. If you work hard, you will get there. God bless you.